Y'all can have a seat. Let's give a big hand for our band here. It's hard to get up here and sing. It's hard to get up here at all and do anything, even play a game. But to get up here and play and sing and go through all that, it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of practice. And I'm thankful that Ashley puts the time in, even though she's at Union now and living down there. And I'm thankful for all of the different ones that come around. And I'm sure if you feel led to sing or play, that Ashley would love for you to come and join in. As you probably have figured out, Dr. Keaton, soon to be, is not up here tonight. He's given me the opportunity to speak tonight and actually to speak for the next 2 weeks. So you'll get to hear from me 3 weeks in a row. So that's either a good time or a whatever. But you'll get to hear from me 3 weeks in a row. I'm going to attempt to sit down because, I tend to get a little excited and move around a little bit. But I'm going to attempt to sit down and be a little bit more personal with you tonight. But we're going to be looking at a series over the next 3 weeks called Finding My True Identity. And we're going to be looking at 3 different questions, starting with tonight of who am I? And then we're going to roll on in over the next couple of weeks to answer some questions. Why am I here and what do I do now? So I'm hoping that it will be a series that will resonate with you. I'm hoping it'll be a series that will help you kind of expand your mind a little bit, expand your thought process a little bit. And I'm thankful that Ryan's given me the opportunity to speak. I'm also thankful that Matt and Ethan are really good with graphics and really good with slides, because if I would have put these PowerPoint slides together, it probably would have just said, who am I on a black screen? So I'm thankful that we have a lot of people that have a lot of talent and that can help put all of this together. But we're going to be looking at a passage of Scripture out of Acts here in just a few minutes. But it's Acts chapter 9. And what we're going to be looking at when we're talking about finding our true identity is the transformation of Saul of Tarsus to Paul the Apostle. Saul to Paul is kind of the clever way you would say it, and most people would talk about it. Actually, Saul means Paul. So actually, his name didn't change. His just identity changed. So that's what we're going to be talking about. But in thinking about this and kind of preparing for it, it made me think about a movie that I've watched over the years and enjoyed, and I'm sure some of you have probably seen it, but it's called The Bourne Identity. Anybody ever seen that? Anybody ever seen that movie? Anybody? 2 people. Great. So I'm not the only one. So anyway, if you haven't seen it, it's a very good movie. I'm not going to show it in here. Probably not appropriate for the church setting, but it's a good movie. So you can check that out on your own time there. But anyway, you've got this guy, Jason Bourne, and he gets picked up in the middle of the ocean and is just basically was left for dead. And when he wakes up, he has no idea who he is. He has no idea where he's at. He has no idea what his purpose is, why he's where he's at, or anything. But as he regains his strength, he starts figuring out he has all of these skills. He has these skills where he can fight, where he can run really fast. He's very athletic, and he has no idea how he has these skills. And he has no idea what his actual purpose in life is. And come to find out, his purpose is he's actually a trained assassin. But that's not really who he is. That's not really who he wants to be or feels to be. So it kind of chronicles his whole life of living one way, but trying to actually figure out who he is in the end. And I think that kind of parallels to a lot of us in here tonight, where we maybe identify ourselves in one way or identify ourselves with a certain team or sporting club or a certain way of living or things of that nature, and we don't actually align ourselves with what the true identity that God has for us. God lays out a purpose and a plan for our lives even before we're born. He lays out that. And we have a hard time once we actually get into this world, and especially what the age that y'all are in now, in junior high and high school and college and some post-college, of really dialing into what God really has for you and living in a way that actually is meaningful to Him and actually fulfilling to you and actually fulfilling to your call and your purpose here on the earth. And that's kind of what I want to talk to us about over the next few weeks is really dialing into what God has for you and to what He actually has for your life. And hopefully being able to come out of this in 3 weeks and prayerfully being able to say, I didn't really understand what my purpose was, but now I kind of see the direction and kind of see where God's leading me and where He's taking me. So hopefully that's where we'll get to here in the next few weeks. I'm going to start out with a question. It's always random when we start out with questions of whether people will actually answer them. But it's a real easy question. How would you identify yourself? Anybody? Short. There we go. Short. That's a good one. What else? Tall, yeah. Tall. Slow, athletic. Okay, good. What else? Being Jack, yeah, sure. Okay. Only one Jack, that's right. Huh? What was that? I mean, I don't think we can say that one, Abby. I mean, you're smart. Come on, Abby. You're in there. Who else? Anybody else? Child of God. Hey, there we go. Somebody here is paying attention. Got a good Sunday school answer here. So, we've got a lot of different ways we can define ourselves. We can define ourselves as a son or a daughter. We can define ourselves as a friend. We can define ourselves as an athlete, a ball player, a cheerleader. We can define ourselves, like me, as a father, as a husband. We can define ourselves in a lot of different ways, but I'm glad that Gracie did say child of God, because I would think a lot of us in here would probably say that we define ourselves as a Christian, right? Maybe. I didn't hear anybody say it, so maybe not. But I would think that a lot of us would probably say, if someone asked us or came up to us, or the way that we were trying to portray our life or live our life, we would say that we're a Christian, right? Unfortunately, a lot of times, what we say about being a Christian in our life doesn't actually line up with the way that we're living our life. It doesn't actually line up with the way we're going about our life. It doesn't actually line up with what God's actually laid out for us. It's something good to say, and it makes us feel good, but it doesn't actually line up with what we're actually carrying out. And that's where I want to be able to get to once this series is over and kind of get us to where we can figure that out. So we're going to be in Acts chapter 9. It's going to be on the screen if you can follow along there, or you can keep up with it in your Bible, or you can, just follow me read it here in just a minute. But if we're kind of giving a little backstory in Acts, so Acts literally means the axe. So this is coming out of the gospel. Jesus has died and been resurrected and taken into heaven. The Holy Spirit has came. And now we're actually out to where the disciples are actually proclaiming the message of Christ all over. They're proclaiming the good news. They're proclaiming the way and the only way, which is that following Jesus. And they're actually doing that. And they're being met with a lot of opposition. They're being met with a lot of people that don't believe that, they don't understand that, they don't think that's accurate, they don't believe that's right. And in doing so, they're facing a lot of struggles, and they're facing a lot of people that are really trying to get rid of them. That's where Saul comes in. Saul is not a great guy. Saul is a persecutor. He is got it out for the Christians, and he's just not living in a very good way. So we're going to pick up in chapter 9, and if you're reading along in my Bible, it's actually entitled the Damascus Road. But it's literally a road that Saul was traveling on to get to a city to continue his persecution of Christians. And we're going to see what happens here as he's traveling on this road and what kind of starts to change in his life as we go. But if we pick up in chapter 9 in the first verse, it says, "Now Saul was still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. He went to the high priest and requested letters from him to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any men or women who belonged to the way, he might bring them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he traveled and was nearing Damascus, a light from heaven suddenly flashed around him. Falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' 'Who are you, Lord?' Saul said. 'I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting,' he replied. 'But get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do.' The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the sound but seeing no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they took him by the hand and led him into Damascus. He was unable to see for 3 days and did not eat or drink." So we're going to see three things out of this passage that kind of help us to understand one way we're living and where we're going to try to be getting to as we go forward here. And the first thing we see is we see that we aren't defined by our past. You aren't defined by your past. So if we back up just a little bit over here into the 7th chapter of Acts, is the first time we actually really see Saul really just coming out in his full life against Christians. And if we read a passage back there, there was a gentleman by the name of Stephen. He's considered the first deacon of the church. And he had came along at a time when the other disciples were out spreading the good news, and he had became kind of the newest person out spreading that, and he was proclaiming this, and they actually put him on trial because they didn't believe what he was saying. They thought that he was blaspheming and just telling lies and everything. So he actually goes on trial and is considered the first Christian martyr because during this trial they actually stoned him to death. And the person that basically stood there at his feet as he was being stoned and was basically reveling in it and was excited to see it happen was Saul. He stood there, watched it happen, and was excited because the persecution was happening of the Christians, and he was hopeful that that persecution was going to lead to fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer people actually believing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if he could eventually eradicate it, then it wouldn't exist no more, which was his main goal. So then we move forward into the first part of this, and it says, meanwhile Saul was still breathing threats and murder against the disciples. Even though he has seen this and he's got this change in his life, he wants more and he's out for more. But what we see is that we kind of struggle with the same thing in our lives. We feel like our past, maybe some of the mistakes that we've made, maybe the direction that we've went in our life, maybe some of the struggles that we've had in our past define who we are. They define our identity. People look at us and maybe we think that, well, when they see me, they see the issues that I've had in the past. They see the problems that I've had. They've seen how I maybe cheated, how I maybe lied, how I maybe didn't treat somebody right, maybe didn't do what I was called to do. And we start to let that become our identity. We start to let those past mistakes define who we are. And when we do that, we can't fully accept who God has actually chosen us to be because we're letting the past and our mistakes define who our true identity is. And we see Saul's doing the exact same thing here. His identity in his mind is being defined because he is a persecutor of the Christian. He is someone that is seeking to destroy everything that a Christian believes in and is seeking to take them completely out. And I'm sure in his mind, he probably thinks that there's no way that he could ever actually believe like a Christian believed or would ever be accepted by a Christian because he's persecuted. He's killed them. He's stoned them. He's done everything he can to stand against them. But what we forget so often is that we aren't defined by those past mistakes. Now, I'm sure if anybody in here would want to stand up and testify, they'd probably say that they've made a lot of mistakes. I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I know I've done a lot of things I wish I hadn't have done. I've lived in ways that I wish I hadn't have lived, and I'm sure some of us in here probably feel the same way. And you probably think that maybe because of those, I'll never be able to fully walk in what God has for me because people will never trust me or people will never look at me the same way. And what we have to understand is that's just not the case. That's not the truth. We aren't defined by our past mistakes. We're defined by what our future selves will be. And we're defined by what God has for us, not by any of the mistakes we've made in the past. Sure, we have to live with them and we have to work through them. But once we come into true knowledge and understanding of what Christ has for us, we're no longer defined by that past. The other thing we see here when we talk about that is disobedience in the present doesn't define your future. Disobedience in the present doesn't define your future. So Saul obviously has went through all of these struggles in the past. He's went through and just lived a terrible life, but he's still carrying on that same disobedience right here on the Damascus Road. He has seeked out the synagogue to give him letters so that he can do one thing and one thing only. And that's go to Damascus and find every Christian he can find and bring them all back and imprison them, and I'm sure eventually kill them, because if he does that, he knows that he can stop the spread of the gospel message from getting there. And I don't know if you've ever wondered or not. I know I wondered a lot when I've been studying this and all that. But why do you think Saul was so adamant to get rid of the Christian? Why do you think he was so adamant to do that? I don't have that question on your sheet, but if somebody has something they'd like to say, they're welcome to say it.
He was a Jew, and he thought that they were going against God.
Sure. That's right. You see, Saul, and a lot of Bible scholars will tell us that the reason that he was struggling so much with this is because he was, just like Joseph said, a Jew. But he had a twinge of conviction that maybe, just maybe, Christianity was the right way to go. Maybe, just maybe, what they were saying was true. And maybe he actually was somebody that was supposed to proclaim that gospel message. Maybe he did actually have a purpose for his life that was more than persecuting Christians. Maybe he had a purpose for his life that was actually spreading that message. But he was so afraid and had so much fear for what would happen to him if he actually did that, that he did everything that he could do to try to go the other way. And how often do we in our lives have that same fear? How often do we at school or out on the weekends or out with our friends or out with people that maybe don't believe the same way we believe or don't live the same way that we try to live, how often do we have that same fear creep into our mind of, I know which way I should go, and I know which way the truth is, but I'm just going to stay just a little bit on the outside of it. Because if I stay a little bit on the outside of it, I don't have to struggle with what might happen or how my life might change if I don't commit fully to what I'm supposed to do. And that's where we see that disobedience in the present still doesn't have to define our future. Even though we may have those feelings today, even though we may be struggling with that today, even though we might be walking a little bit into that right now, into that fear, it still doesn't define who our true identity is. It still doesn't take away what we actually have and what the actual purpose for our life is. We're not defined in that, just like Saul wasn't defined in that. He could have lived his whole life without ever answering the call and felt like he was doing it okay. But he would have been living a lie. Just like a lot of us go through that. Just like a lot of us feel like we have a calling on our lives, or we have a identity crisis in our hands where we know we should live one way, but we're living the other way just because of comfort or because of personal preference or because it's a lot easier than what we should be doing. We won't accept the call that's laid on our lives. We won't go out and do what we're called to do. We won't go out and share our faith or proclaim our faith or anything because we're scared of what might actually happen or what God might actually do for our lives. When all along that if we would just step forward and actually do that and actually allow God's true power to come through us and identify us for who we really are, the amazing things that will happen in our lives and the amazing things that will happen in our community and in our church and our schools and everything else can actually take place. Thankfully, we serve a God who's merciful and who offers us grace even when we continue to live in that disobedience. And we see that here with Saul. If you look at the third point here that we have that's kind of the meat of this entire thing, it says we must proclaim who God is. Now I want to stop right here and just reread starting in the third verse here for just all the way down to the sixth verse. And it says, as he traveled and was nearing Damascus, a light from heaven suddenly flashed around him. Falling to the ground, he heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul says in verse 5, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting, he replied. But get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. So here's Saul. He's persecuted the Christians. He's seeking to get rid of every one of them. He's living the life that he feels like he's supposed to live. He's living the life that he feels like is being directed towards him. Yet when God calls him, He calls him Lord. He understands who God is. And he proclaims that right back to him by saying, "Who are you, Lord?" You see, Saul knew in his heart of hearts and knew that what was actually destined for him, and I'm sure in those moments of when it was just him, he knew his actual calling and purpose and identity wasn't in the direction he was going. It was in the direction that God actually had laid out for him. And that's the same thing that we have in here. Our identity is not defined in anything other than God and Jesus Christ. Our identity does not come from how great we are at anything or how bad we are at anything. Our identity does not come from where we live, whether we're rich, whether we have nothing. It doesn't come from any of that. Our identity only comes from God and the purpose that He has for our lives that He's already ordained and laid out before us, even before we were born. And the only way we'll ever actually understand what He has for our lives and what He actually is going to do for us is when we actually stop playing the game and stop identifying ourselves as a Christian in word but not in life, and actually go forward with boldness proclaiming that God is the only person that identifies me and that I'm going to walk each and every day of my life following His direction, following His word, and following His path only and not my own. And whatever happens to me, whatever comes my way, whether that takes me to the highest high or the lowest low, I will always come back to proclaiming who God is in my life and what He means for me and through me and in me each and every day. So my question tonight, as we kind of reach our point of closing, is what's holding you back from reaching your true identity? What's holding you back from being the actual vessel that God has laid you out to be? What's holding you back from being someone that will go out and will proclaim His word, proclaim His truth, and live for whatever purpose that He's laid out for you? Is it pride? I spoke about pride a couple of weeks ago at Common Grounds, and it was so eye-opening to study about how much pride actually affects our true walk with God, and how much it alters our identity and alters what we're actually called to do. Is it fear? Is it just personal comfort? Whatever it is, what's holding you back from actually reaching that true identity? Because there's a lot of kids in here and there's a lot of people in here, and I promise you, if we all work to find our true identity in God and actually let Him work through us in the way that He's called us to do, we could change not just our schools, but we could change the surrounding area. We could change reaching all over this place, reaching from Henderson County, reaching out into West Tennessee, reaching out across the states. We could reach out so far and do so much if we would just start focusing ourselves to finding who we truly are and finding who our identity actually is in Christ. So as the band kind of comes on up and kind of gets ready here as we get ready to close, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Some of you may be in here tonight and you may be thinking, I don't know who my true identity is or who I am because I don't even know what it means to even be a Christian. I don't know what it means to actually walk with God. I don't understand what it means for us to actually, submit our lives to Christ. And if that's you, that's okay. That's fine. Here in just a minute, we're going to sing a song, and during that time, I'm going to be standing over here, and Ryan's going to be standing out here, and we've got so many leaders in the back that are welcome to talk to you. Because the first step to actually finding your true identity is actually submitting your life to Christ. To actually going through and recognizing that you do have sin in your life and that you've been trying to live your own way, and that it's time for you to quit trying to live your way and try to actually live the way that God's promised for you to live. Maybe you're in here and you understand that a little bit, but you haven't been actually doing that. You haven't actually stepped forward and trusted that God's plan is better than your plan. Maybe you haven't actually stepped forward and said, hey, I understand what you're saying, but I haven't actually done that. I haven't came forward and actually proclaimed that. And, maybe if that's something you need to do, if that's something you need to do, we're going to be here to talk to you. Or maybe you're like a lot of us in here probably and would say, I've done that, but I'm not living that. I've done that in my life. I've said I'm a Christian. I've actually walked forward and said that and been baptized. But I've walked out of those baptismal waters and walked right back into the world and continued to live in an identity that's not actually mine. And I don't really know who I am. I don't really know what God has for me. I don't really know what His plan for my life is. I don't really know what His purpose for my life is. But I'm ready to find it. I'm ready to quit thinking about it. I'm ready to quit worrying about it. I'm ready to fully commit to whatever God has for me and to go out and to live and proclaim His name each and every week.